Black women and little black girls have black girl magic, and black boys have black boy joy. But what about us black men? What happens to black boy joy when that boy becomes a man? On this episode, we're breaking down what it takes for black men to be their true, free, authentic selves. Something I like to call black man freedom. Thank you for joining another episode of Ungentrified with your boy, of course, Kent Johnson. I have a really dope guest on today. And before we get into who that is and what we'll be talking about, the one thing that I ask everybody that comes on the show is what's on their radar at the moment. So, what's your favorite jam? What Netflix rabbit hole have you fallen into? What hobby have you picked up? What's on your radar right now? What's your favorite thing right now?
My favorite thing right now. Great question, man. I'm reading a lot, just really doing a lot of work on myself, and we'll get into it, I'm sure. But it's really just wanting to step up my spiritual and wellness game, man. I've really taken seriously, kind of not only getting back in the gym, but doing everything that is associated with me living a healthier lifestyle, whether it's eating better, um, keeping and monitoring my thoughts. So all of that stuff is what's top of mind to me, man. And really don't have much time to watch TV, but when I do, I enjoy watching Chef's Table on Netflix, which is a pretty unique interest of mine. But yeah, man, that's what's going on.
Cool. Let's see what's on my radar right now. I too am in the same space you are mentally, as far as trying to get all of the things whole, body, mind, spirit. So I just got back from Senegal and I ate like a whole fool. And I knew I was going to. So before I left, I did like a 2-day detox because I knew I was going to cut up, because Senegal has some of the best food on the continent. So for 2 weeks, I was eating everything that got put in front of me. And I came back today and I was like, I got 6 weeks to Memorial Day. Let me get right. So I went back to my old trainer that I had from a couple of years ago. And when I walked through the door, he looked at me like he was about to put me to work, and he did. So I'm surprised I'm even able to record right now, because I was on the verge of passing out maybe about 2 hours ago. But
Listen, man, I know how that feels. I actually had the same experience with my trainer last week, and I was like, "Listen, man, shock my body," and he shocked it for real, man. I was out there like, "Yo, what? I've worked out before. Why am I struggling?" But such is life when you're trying to build a business and build a brand.
right.
You tend to let yourself go in that regard. But glad to hear that you're back.
Yeah, I'm trying to get back, and I'm trying to incorporate yoga as like my conditioning to the hard work that he's about to put me through. So I'm
Yeah.
about to go into that space as well. That and then mentally getting back on my Spanish lessons. I was going hard on Spanish, and then I fell off because I knew I was taking a group to Senegal, so I needed to start practicing my French again. I learned French. I took French for like 7 years way back in the day, but when you don't use it, you lose it. So, but now that I got Senegal out the way, I'm back on my Spanish game hard. So I'm trying to be a polyglot in these streets,
I hear you.
But let's see, what's my jam at the moment? Well, somebody a couple of weeks ago put me on to this cat named Osvaldo.
Mm.
And it's this dude that does like these kind of instrumental chill hop. I guess that's the genre. I don't know. But his stuff goes. So I've been listening to he has a whole bunch of like EPs and albums and like random singles that he drops. But if you want to get an idea of how he sounds, I would find and download the song Fly Like Birds by Osvaldo, and that's Osvaldo.
Okay.
But yeah, definitely kind of like a groove, kind of chill, nod your head, vibe out kind of moment. And the mood I'm trying to be on all summer. It reminds me of like a beach and a drink with some dark liquor. So trying to keep that mindset all summer.
Word. I hear that.
But yeah, so you guys are probably wondering who I've been talking to about dark liquor and working out for the last couple of minutes. I'm going to let him introduce himself to you guys. So go ahead and let the people know who you are.
Well, Kent, thanks again for having me on, brother. I really appreciate it. I know we've been connected for a while on social, but never really had a formal opportunity to connect. So I'm glad that we were able to make this happen. But my name is Jason Rosario. I am an executive producer and host of the Yahoo original series called Dear Men. I'm also the founder of The Lives of Men, which is a digital platform that serves the kind of interests of men as we navigate manhood. So I'm an Afro-Latino man, Dominican descent, live in New York City, born and raised. And I'm out here just trying to move the culture, man, move the world in a positive direction and grow at the same time, brother. So I'm always humbled and grateful when folks ask me to share my story through these mediums because, you kind of just move about the world trying to do the right thing and don't realize the impact that you're making until you got to stop and smell the flowers. So, for me, it's always humbling to be in these spaces.
And he's being incredibly humble. That's just a few of the things that he does. But that is a perfect setup for why I asked Jason to come on and discuss this topic with me today, because he's doing the work in this space and really forcing all men, but specifically men of color, to really reevaluate and take an accounting of who they are as individuals and how the world sees them and how they can become better in both spaces. So definitely glad to have Jason on to discuss today's topic. And you know what? Let's go right into it. So when I turned 37, this was last year, I put a post on Instagram and I ended that caption with a question. And it was, we all know about Black Boy Joy, but what happens when the boy becomes a man? Like, what is the term for a man who has that freedom, that what we've given the name of Black Boy Joy? I am trying to identify it for myself and give me something to quantify it with, called the term Black male freedom. And for me, it's something that's a work in progress for me. I'm learning every day on the things that I still need to work on. And I wanted to explore that more because I had a theory. I was like, when men, Black men specifically, or men of color, reach a certain age or a certain level in life, things start to change for them, hopefully. And how do we tap into that? So that's why I brought Jason on today. I thought that he would be a great line of expertise for this, because, we're all on our journeys in life. But yeah, I wanted to know what happens to Black Boy Joy when that boy grows up. And I'm trying to figure that out. So when I was putting together the theory that I had, I looked at some of those people who I felt, exemplified Black male freedom. So who came to mind was Will Smith. I think that's everybody's kind of favorite example of being free right now and doing all the things that people would second guess themselves about and in finding the value in that. So I think that's one of the prime examples of Black male freedom, or whatever that may be. I look at LeBron James too. And when I thought about him, I went immediately to like that infamous press conference walk away that he did. I think that was last year in 2017, where he was kind of done and he grabbed his man bag and walked up out, and it became like an instant meme. But I wondered if the LeBron at 21 would have done that same thing. And then not only that, but just his recent tone in commentary on the world. It's a very, I don't give a what everybody else has to say about what I'm saying right now. And, that comes with certain levels. Even Dwayne Wade, I remember when there was this big hullabaloo like 10 or 15 years ago where people realized that he had black nail polish on, and there was a whole conversation around that. And then when I look at people who are younger or kind of in that transitional phase, I look at like August Alsina. Cause I remember when he first dropped his debut album, and he was just, very characterized version of what a thug was supposed to be. And his whole album era was around that. And then you look at him now and he's very freer than he was then to express himself personality wise. He's rocking man buns and talking about different things that the thug August Alsina wouldn't have talked about on his first album. So, looking at those four men, I was like, these are prime examples to me of what black male freedom would be. But there's a difference in all of them. And I'm trying to figure out what would be like the tipping point for black men. What kicks off that season in a black man's life where they just don't care anymore? And I don't know. I'm going to turn to you, Jason. What do you think that is? What do you think is the tipping point for black men?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great theory that you started to noodle on, man, because I think it definitely coincides with the work that I'm doing in terms of wanting men to step into their greatness and step into their truest, authentic selves. Whether it's kind of by debunking some of the myths of masculinity and what it means to be a man. And let me backtrack. I think my work sits at that intersection of self-actualization, identity, and masculinity, right? So what does that mean? That means that self-actualization it's Maslow. Is it Maslow's? I don't remember who the famous psychologist was, but it's the highest need that every human has, which is to be their best realized self. So it's really that. Then identity is who are we and how do we show up in different spaces, all through the lenses of masculinity. So when you look at that and you take it through those lenses, you start to think about, well, for men, I mean, in particular, what you've described just now in some of these men is that they've gone through a certain amount of that process or a certain level of that process, whether it's doing the self-reflective work of trying to understand who they are, what kind of spaces they occupy, and then who they are in those spaces. I think everyone that you've described has gone through that exercise. I think there's also something to be said about the level of freedom that's gained through financial independence, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you've gotten to a point where in your life and in your career where you are your own boss and you are dictating outcomes and you are creating opportunities not just for yourself but for the people around you, then there's a level of empowerment there that nothing else can give you. So when you think about that and you combine those two aspects together, then you start to create this new image in your own mind of who you are, and it's an empowering feeling. And then I think the last piece of it, which I think can be a little bit undervalued, is pain, right? When you go through a certain amount of pain in your life, whether it's breakups, whether it's loss, whether it's failures, whatever it may be, if you're doing the work and if you're doing the exercises of making sure that you're taking those lessons and applying them and growing from them, then that also informs a level of freedom in your life going forward because you start to understand who you are, not only at times of success, but at times of failure as well. So I think for me, those are the three things that start to create a tipping point for men, black and brown, Latino men, to kind of step into their greatness in that regard. And funny enough, I actually just posted on Instagram a quote that I've heard many times before. It's not really a quote, it's more of a phrase, but it's step out of your head and into your greatness, right? And that's kind of what I think all of these things does, is that it allows us to step outside of ourselves in a way it's authentic and really forces us to grow into the men that we're wanting to become.
Right. And I'm glad that you brought up finances, because that was really the first place I went when I started to think about, like, okay, what's the common thing between all of these men is the fact that they have access to money that most of us don't have. And that affords a new set of freedoms. When I think a lot of us operate in the sense of, well, I can't do certain things or I can't say certain things because there are still people in the world that I may have to rely upon for something. And I don't want to step on toes or upset anybody. But once you hit a certain financial bracket, you don't care about those things. It's like, if you don't agree or not, these bills are still going to get paid. I can still get what I want. I don't need your approval to make things happen in the world or to affect change or to state my opinion. So I think, like you said, money plays a big thing into that. you mentioned another part too. I think access to and access could mean so many different things, right? Once you have reached a certain level of fame, which is something that all of these men also have, you're in different rooms, you're in different spaces, you're in different, air qualities. All of
Right.
these things start to change. And that's something that definitely changes your perspective on things. I know for me, travel has definitely been one of those things. And that, boils into that realm of access, being in different parts of the world and seeing what people, responded to and didn't, or what was important, to certain cultures or certain populations, and then looking back and be like, man, we had it all wrong, or
Hmm.
adding that to what you now understand as life, and letting that open you up too.
I mean, I think one of the things that we tend to do, though, I think money is very important, but I think especially those of us who grow up in underserved communities, right? We don't come from much. We tend to look at money as the epitome of success, right? That is
Hmm.
kind of the goal. And how many of us have also seen those people that do have money and do have access still not come into themselves in the way that we're describing, right? So I think there's something deeper there that is missing, beyond kind of the access and the money, and is that self-reflective piece, right? Is you're traveling the world, Kent, but you're also aware. You're also open to learning. You're also open to growing. It doesn't matter how much money you have or don't have. I think not only so, but when you combine those things, when you combine the ability to travel and see the world, but then you're also open to receiving these lessons and grow, then that's where I think the tipping point is. But having the money and the access alone, I don't think does it. And I think that's the mistake that you've seen a lot of. I mean, we can point to a ton of celebrities that have it all and still manage to find themselves getting in trouble and making mistakes that you think back, you're like, why are you doing this? You have everything you could possibly ask for, but you're still making the same mistake. So I think it's a combination of both.
Right. What's that old saying? It's like money reveals who you truly are. And,
Absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely.
yeah, sometimes people are the same way, whether they got, overdraft fees kicking in or they got $3 million sitting in the bank account. And as you mentioned that, I was like, there are two people who I can think of right away, but I'm not naming names because this isn't a gossip,
Right, right, right.
a gossip rag. So, but I think everybody has a quick idea of two people they can rattle off the top of their heads who, money didn't change them, or it amplified the nastiness that we knew of them, in the beginning. But yeah, it's one of the things, but it's not the only thing. I think age factors into it too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I look at like my grandparents that are still here, and knowing them, of course, all of my life, and remembering them in the early stages, and the conversations I have with them now, or the things that they feel free to say now because they know nobody can tell them anything. They have the power of age behind them. But I'm looking at, those people I named, these are people who are in my age bracket, or,
Well, yeah, that exactly. I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say regarding age. I mean, age is important in that you have to have gone through a certain amount of stuff in your life, but wisdom is something that you gain by being present to that,
Mhm.
by being present to those experiences. And I've met, I mean, I'm sure you have. You've met people that are younger than us that have an incredible amount of wisdom, and you're just like, yo, how old are you? Right? Because it's like, where are you getting this stuff from? But I think it's just a matter of age is important. I think being around enough stuff in your life is important, but then how present are you to those lessons is equally important.
Right. And to expand on the idea of age, I think death, uh, factors into it too. Once you realize that every day is a countdown, you start to look at the world differently. I think about like my dad, and how he has gone into a space where he's very anxious about being around grandkids, and having these kinds of moments where that may not have been a factor to a 25-year-old version of my dad, you know?
Mm,
And then especially for men of color, where the age expectancy is far low than other demographics. We look at just high profile folks, or we're like, they're dying at 40, 50. And these are people who have, money and all of those things that we would assume would clear out, those kind of issues that, oh, you have access to the best doctors in the world. You should be able to live long. And then, they're losing it early on too. I think that plays into it, but you have to realize that there is an end. And that's something that's not on your mind when you're younger, but starts to factor in as you gain in age. But we shouldn't be waiting until we're 50 and 60 to feel that sense of freedom.
Right. No, I agree. I think it's mortality in our proximity to that mortality, or awareness to that mortality, is pretty jarring, man, when you think about how short life is, um, especially with all the things that we have to contend with as Black and brown men. Not only the precariousness of life generally, right? Maybe walking down the street and who knows, God forbid, getting hit by a car. All those things are real. But then when you add on top of that the fact that the odds are stacked against us as it relates to whether it's I don't know, mass incarceration or murder or all of these things that we have to contend with specifically as Black and brown men, um, police shootings, all of that, it just adds a layer of stress. But I think, yeah, it's really about how you decide to approach it. Really, at the end of the day, is how do you use that? How do you use the awareness of your mortality to actually use your time on this earth in a much more intentional, positive, impactful way, not just for yourself, but for other people. So I think you're right.
Yeah, I'm glad you segued us perfectly into where I wanted to go as far as the conversation. You brought up, Black and brown men, and you as Afro Dominican, you exist in two spaces. So is this something that impacts both, Latino and Black men differently? Is it something that's the same, or are there any nuances for each group? What are your takes on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no difference between a Dominican man and an African American man, in my opinion, other than the cultural nuance. And yes, that cultural nuance is a pretty big deal. But at the end of the day, I consider myself a Black man in this country. And my ancestors came from the same places that all of our ancestors came from. Mine just got off on the first stop on the boat, right? Like I like to make that joke for levity, but it's a real thing, right? We are all products and children of the continent of Africa. And so when we think about it that way, and we think about some of the plights that we have to face here in modern day times, we all have to still deal with racism. We all have to deal with lack of opportunities economically and educationally. We all have to deal with issues of mass incarceration and police brutality. Like, so that doesn't necessarily make our experience any different. I think we do have the difference of kind of the cultural aspects and the colorism aspects of, you have light skinned Latinos versus dark skinned Latinos, but the same thing in the African American community. You have kind of the issues of colorism as well. So I don't think there's much of a difference. I think, in fact, it really is the same. And one of the things that through my work that I try to level set is that experience, is that really there is no difference between our collective experience in this country as a community, as a Black and brown community. And if we can start to realize that, then we can start to really move forward. And I don't know if you're going to get into this a little bit later, but the Nipsey Hussle death really hit a lot of people hard because of that concept that I just described. Is, man, we can do all the right things and still succumb to some of the negativity in our neighborhoods. So I think when you think about that, and you think about the plights that we have to deal with as Black and brown men, I don't think there's much of a difference. So if anything, if we can realize our commonalities and start to come together and really do for our communities, then hopefully we won't see the Nipsey Hussle's type of tragedies, and we'll start to really band together and then start to kind of tear down some of the walls that we have between one another. So in short, no, I don't think about it that way. I don't think about it from a difference between, say, a Dominican Puerto Rican man versus an African American man. I think it's all pretty much in the same. We're all in the same boat.
Yeah. And bringing up Nipsey, I think what's been missing, or people are starting to get into this part of the conversation of everything surrounding his death, is that you don't have to be perfect at everything. Like there is a space for you to be flawed and still have an opportunity to grow. So, we've only gotten to see a part of what he was capable of and a part of, his thought process. He didn't end his evolution, the day he passed on. He was still a work in progress. And I think that's part of what stagnates a lot of us sometimes when we're thinking about how we want to be as men and what we want to put out in the world, especially in the space of cancel culture and things like that. We have lost the idea of letting people grow and letting people make mistakes. There's no turning back. And I think as individuals, we need to not be afraid of making the mistake, because that's where the lesson is. And that's where the opportunities for freedom are, but yeah, it's frustrating to see that we feel sometimes that we don't get the opportunity to grow. So is there a way for us to create that feeling of freedom for Black and brown men earlier in the game? Like I mentioned before, I don't want us to be 50 and 60 and being like, I got it, I understand it. I now want to live without, worrying about everybody else's opinions and this, that, the third. Can we harness that into something earlier on for the younger parts of our generation? Or do we even need to? Are they in a space where they're freer than we are?
Well, I think we need to. I think we can't take for granted that, yes, the younger generations are much more connected and much more aware because of social media and because of they have the benefits of having us as quote unquote elders to kind of show them that there is a different path. I think there is an opportunity for us to create this mindset in our younger generation earlier. And I think it needs to happen. One of the things that I'm doing with the work that I do is to make sure that I socialize the work in New York City high schools with young men. And as free as they may be, as aware as they are with social media, etc., I still think they need some sort of guidance. And specifically, my work with boys is around teaching them their self-worth, and that their self-worth comes from not the things that they possess or the money that they have in their pocket or whatever J's you have on your feet. It really comes from the very fact that you exist and you matter. And so indoctrinating our young men with that early on is what's going to help them. And then again, I think when I look at what's wrong, I don't want to say what's wrong, but what's happening with our boys as they grow into young men and then ultimately full grown men is that we're teaching them the opposite of what we want them to be, right? We want men to be more emotive. We want men to be more tapped into their selves so that they can be stronger husbands, brothers, and and members of their community. But if we're teaching them that they should man up and that boys don't cry and that you need to be tough, that's the antithesis of what it is that we want them to be. So it's really just changing their calibration, if you will, and changing the inputs that are going into them, hoping that the outputs that we get in the future are much more productive and valuable. So I do think it's important that we start to do the work with young people. And I am starting to see that the effects of that is actually helping. I think we underestimate our young people as well. When we sit them down, specifically young boys, all we need to do is listen to them. And I think people are afraid to listen to young men speak freely and openly about their fears, what they're angry about, what they're upset about, what they're scared about. And I think sometimes that's all it takes is just let's sit down and let's listen to them. And then hopefully we can give them what they need as opposed to what we think they should have.
Yeah, I agree. I applaud you for the sense of community that you're intent on building in these young men, because I think that's something that we didn't necessarily have when we were in their space. The idea of community has changed. I think the definition has changed. Mm-hmm. It's no longer your 4 blocks. If you have access to, at minimal, a smartphone, you have all of these opinions and outlooks that we wouldn't have had, 20, 25 years ago. So, yeah. And that works on both sides of the spectrum. It could put you in a space where you're validated by your negativity, but it could also put you in a space where you're exposed and learning. But it's all in how you use it. But I think the one thing that I wished that I had as a young, black boy on the verge of manhood was more black men in that space who had found or were on that path to figuring out, the best way to be. I went to high school in San Diego, and the school I went to was like 10% black. At one point, I think the population, we had gotten so few amounts of black people that we had got lumped into like other when they did a school census one year. So
Wow.
it wasn't too many of us. Like we could all sit at a cafeteria lunch table and stretch our arms out and be comfortable. Like, so that wasn't something that I saw. And in preparation for this, I was talking to a homeboy of mine. I was like, yo, I remember clearly all of the older black men that I encountered through school. And I can name them for names. And I even started like looking for them online. I see like, oh, they're still online. And I wish that I had more than just like 3 or 4 to rattle off. But I know even in that, I was at a benefit to have just that amount versus some people who never get that experience. So that also plays into that idea of access. You having ideas or, people who personify those kind of balanced understandings of manhood in your life early on makes it easier. But I don't know. I think this generation is a little bit freer than we are. And I don't know if that's, something that speaks to the work that we've done as young men and figuring it out and being able to turn that around and give it back. Are we changing the ideas of fatherhood? Are we having the conversations that our fathers didn't have? Or are we having them earlier so that the impact is long standing? It's hard to say, but I think, if we talked about Will Smith earlier, I look at like a Jaden Smith. If he
Mm-hmm.
came up under, a Will who was in a space where he had the money, the access, the world views, that this is the kind of mind and free being that we get. We get a Jaden Smith out of that, I don't know. I feel like they have a better playing field than we may have had. So I have hopes for them, but I don't know. Who do you see as an inspiration? Because as we mentioned before, we're both men who are working on who we are, what we are, and how the world views us. Is there anyone that you see as an inspiration and like, man, I'm really trying to get into that space or hit that level?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it, um, I'm not going to mention a celebrity, right? Because I think that's low hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm.
I think my inspiration are brothers like you, brothers like John Jackson, brothers like, um, Michael Clark, brothers like Anton Barriola. Like, these are guys that may not have the celebrity aspect to it, but are living in their purpose and are living in their truth, and may or may not have full time jobs, may or may not have specific platforms that they're monetizing, what have you. But you guys are all living this authentic truth that is you, that is admirable. So I think I admire that more than I admire, celebrity. And yeah, Will Smith is an idol. Who doesn't want to be a Will Smith? Who doesn't want to be a Diddy? Who doesn't want to be a Jay-Z? But I think those guys they travel different landscapes than we did. And though we love their projects and their works, I don't know if it's as relatable as it is looking to my left and my right when I see you, when I see other brothers that are doing it. And I'm like, yeah, that's inspiring. Like, not only do I have to level up, but how can I help them get to where they want to be? Right. And hopefully they'll think about the same as it relates to me. So when I think about that, I think about brothers like that. But when I also think about, like, I will give you a celebrity, right? I'm going to think about someone who you may not think about, and that's Jordan Peele, for example, right? Jordan Peele is an incredible filmmaker, and he came from sketch comedy, ridiculous stuff, to 2 movies that he's written and produced and directed that have changed the genre of the horror film, and really elevated it to something that is somewhat of a social experiment, right? Something that makes us think. When you think about his latest movie, and just the messaging in that movie, and even what he said about the movie in interviews. I mean, he said, "Look, I'm not going to cast any white folks. I'm going to cast all people of color." Like that level of empowerment in an industry that is dominated by white folks is admirable, you know, and that only comes from being in connection with your truest self and who you are, and not allowing anything or anyone to shake you from that. And yes, success helps, right? The fact that his first film was a blockbuster and that the second film has also done really well. But I think ultimately it comes down to him not being shaken from his core and from his truth. So that's admirable in my book as well.
Yeah, when I asked that question, I was like, well, who do I look to that's not, widely known, who's not a celebrity, for those spaces? And you rattled off a lot of the names that, I pick up on what they're doing as well. And I'm, very interested in what they have to say and the paths that they've taken. I look at, John Henry, who's,
Yeah, John Henry.
yeah,
Right.
like I think he's doing major things.
He's
And
also Dominican, by the way. I didn't know that. I just learned
oh yeah, yeah.
that. That's my guy.
Yeah, him being authentically himself and creating this space and just in all of those people that we've named, everyone having a different take on life and showing that it's not one way to be a black man in this space and to be free in this space. I look at Paul Brunson too. I think he
Yeah.
does, really dope work in kind of normalizing what manhood looks like for black and brown men. I think they all do really great jobs at creating the depth behind what it is to be a man, in our space. So yeah, the people I named earlier were kind of the ones in my celebrity space. If I think of anybody else,
Yeah.
hmm.
I mean, I think I'd say as you think about that, I think back to what Issa Rae said, right? Like Issa Rae said, it's time that we start networking across and not so much focus on networking up or down, right? Or networking up, because the next mogul could be right next to us, you know, and our peers. And so, especially as black and brown folks, we should be helping each other grow and elevate. And that's not something that I think we traditionally think about.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a lesson that I was thankful to learn early on. I look back at people who I met maybe 10, 15 years ago. And I talked to them, I'm like, man, remember when we was bums? Like we didn't have no kind of idea.
Right.
None of the conversations that we had prepared us for who we are now. And just think about all the things that we've learned. I've had that conversation so many times with, fellow brothers like, wow, we had no idea that we would be here. But these are also the people who champion me in rooms, instead of worrying about trying to catch the attention of someone higher up. When you get higher up, you want all of those people, rallying around you as well to speak your name in those spaces where you may not be.
Yeah.
Uh, I definitely agree with that. So, as you mentioned, this is the work that you do. This is the work that you've done and the work that you'll continue to do. I know you have Dear Men popping off. You're at what, episode 4 now?
It'll be episode 4 as of tomorrow. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So who's going to be on tomorrow?
Man, we got to, speaking of those brothers that are under the radar, so to speak, in terms of celebrity, but are, that definitely have cult followings amongst our people. Jason Wilson. Jason Wilson is a brother who is based out of Detroit, and he runs an academy, a martial arts academy, that focuses on teaching young boys how to tap into their emotions through martial arts. And he's got like a cult following. Even one of his exercises, actually one of his rituals, was so popular that it inspired an episode of This Is Us.
Yes, I remember that episode.
Yeah. So the push up, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm having him on. We're going to talk about exactly what we just talked about now: rebuilding our boys. What can we be doing to raise them differently? So I'm excited about that. I also got a chance to sit down with Swizz Beats. We talked about brotherhood. Got a chance to sit down with Kevin Love as well to talk about mental health. So, you know, we try to really get a swath of brothers just from different avenues, different backgrounds, to kind of talk about what it is that we're facing right now in this socially, politically charged time, as men, right? And how we're having to re-examine ourselves and our behaviors. And so, I'm really excited about it, and I'm hoping that as people watch the show, that they continue to watch it and that they're getting something out of the conversations.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to the Swiss Beats episode. I remember when you posted kind of like a photo from it a couple of weeks ago. And, in hearing his name again, that's someone who has also kind of intrigued me
Swiss, exactly.
in his journey.
Yeah.
When I think of an example of like Black Male Freedom, I remember when he posted the clip of him listening to Curtis Mayfield and roller skating around his house.
Right.
I was like, yo, if that ain't a mood, I don't know what is.
Exactly.
So yeah, that to me, that's a perfect example of like Black Male Freedom, just like being in your space and thriving in it. But yeah, looking at, 19-year-old Swiss versus, I think he's in his 40s now, like that growth and, being a family man and living through so many different lives and where he's at now. And then the work that he does now as far as the art space. So I'm definitely looking forward to that episode. But, tell us more about Dear Men. Where can they watch and what time do the episodes drop?
Absolutely, man. So you can watch Dear Men on yahoonews.com. It drops every Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. So if you want to watch it, they're quick episodes. They're between 10 and 12 minutes. So you can watch them on a quick break, during lunch or whatever, on your way to work. But yeah, so you can watch them on yahoonews.com, or you can stream them on Apple TV and on Roku as well. And so you go on to Yahoo News, type in Dear Men, with my name, Jason Rosario, and it should come up. All the episodes should be online. And each episode is accompanied with an article where I've written and kind of tried to fill in some of the gaps that you may not have gotten from the episode, and then hopefully try to advance the conversation that way. But yeah, man, every Wednesday. And episode 4 launches tomorrow with Jason Wilson.
Cool. And Jason, not Jason Wilson, but the Jason that we have on the call is EP of Dear Men. So you definitely want to support, cause if you know how that rolls, EP credits is the credit that you want.
That's it, brother. That's it. I'm glad you brought that up because it's about, ownership, influence, right? Owning your craft, owning your story, or owning your narrative. So yeah, man, that EP. So if you can click on those links, by all means, even if you've already watched it, click again and just let it run in the background. But as many clicks as I can get on those is really what dictates the success of this show. So I appreciate everybody's support.
Yes, definitely. Click, then click again, then tell a friend,
right.
and then click again.
Right.
Yeah, definitely give Jason the support. Also tell him where they can find you socially.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook at Jason_Rosario. That's 2 underscores. So Jason __ Rosario, and The Lives of Men at The Lives of Men, both on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook as well. And then soon to come, these podcasts seem to be taking off. So I'm going to be launching my own called Hey Jason, and that's coming in the next, call it 3 weeks or so. So you can find that on Instagram as well. The Instagram page is there. It's not active, but once we launch, you're going to see some really cool things come across. And, Ken, I'm going to have you on one of those episodes as well. So we're going to have to reciprocate the favor here.
Yeah, I'm glad that transmission went through, because I heard it, I was like, oh, I got to be on. This is a non-negotiable. I got to be on the show. So no, I'm hyped about that. I feel like we got an exclusive right there. So
oh yeah, man, for sure.
Definitely check out that. I'll have all of Jason's information in the show notes as well. And when the podcast drops, I'll update the show notes with his link as well. But Jason, I appreciate you coming on, sharing your wealth with us, and really helping to have this conversation around the theory of Black male freedom. We started digging. There's so much more we could discuss on that, but hey, we're just opening the door for folks. People got to walk through and figure out their own path.
Absolutely.
But of course, shout out to you guys for listening. I think this is actually the first episode I've done since I've hit the 1 year mark. So we have been in it for a year now. You guys have been listening hard. I think I'm at like 16,000 downloads, which is still mind blowing to me.
That's incredible.
I appreciate you guys. I'm trying to triple that number this year. So
Nah, you will. You will.
I'm gonna give you the same advice I gave about Dear Men. Click again, tell a friend, and click again. So,
Yeah, man.
of course, you can find the show, this episode, and all of the other episodes at ungentrifiedpodcast.com or wherever you enjoy podcasts. Of course, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, do me a favor. Click them stars under my name. Give me 5. That's what I like. If you're feeling extra considerate, go ahead and write your boy a review. Those are things that help. And if you haven't already done so, I don't know why you wouldn't have done this already, but subscribe so that you are always aware whenever a new episode drops. And of course, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter as well at Kent W. Johnson. And you need to hit me up and tell me what you thought of Jason's next episode of Dear Men and what you thought about this episode of Ungentrified. But until next time, Jason, as I said, thank you for coming on, and you're welcome to come back anytime.
Thank you. And thanks to your audience and to your listeners, man. I appreciate it. And congrats on your 1 year. Here's to 1,000 more years, brother. You're doing great work, and I'm here to support you in any way. So thanks again for having me.
I appreciate that. And I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.
Peace.